Chapter 1. The bride who ran cathedral's stone walls pressed cold judgment into Eleanor's spine as she fled down the shadowed aisle, wedding gown dragging like chains behind her. Her breath came in ragged gasps, each one tasting of incense and lies. Behind her, the congregation's whispers rose like carrion birds, feasting on her humiliation. Run, just run. She'd stood at the altar for 20 minutes, bouquet trembling in white-knuckled hands, while Marcus failed to appear. 20 minutes of pitying stares and murmured speculation. 20 minutes of her future crumbling like old parchment. Then his text arrived, cold, brief, devastating. "I can't do this. I'm sorry." Eleanor crashed through the cathedral's side door into the autumn twilight, gasping for air that didn't smell of her own shame. Her veil caught on the iron gate and tore. She left it there, ghostly white against the rust, and stumbled into the narrow streets of the old quarter. The city's historic district swallowed her whole. Gas lamps flickered to life along cobblestone paths that curved between medieval buildings, their facades weathered by centuries. This was the part of the city tourists photographed, but locals avoided after dark. Too quiet, too easy to get lost in its labyrinth of forgotten alleys. Eleanor didn't care. Getting lost seemed preferable to going back. Her heel caught between stones and snapped. She kicked off both shoes, letting the cold ground bite through her stockings, and kept moving. Tears blurred her vision, but she welcomed the darkness closing in. Maybe the night would hide her. Maybe it would erase her entirely. She'd been so careful, so cautious. After her father's business partner had stolen everything, their company, their home, their dignity, she'd rebuilt herself into someone safe. Someone who planned meticulously, who trusted slowly, who would never again be blindsided by betrayal. Yet here she stood, abandoned at the altar by a man she'd vetted for 2 years. Stupid. So stupid. The street narrowed until buildings leaned together overhead, blocking out the last of the evening light. Eleanor's steps slowed. She'd walked too far. The cobblestones beneath her feet were older here, uneven and moss-slicked. The gas lamps grew sparse, their light struggling against shadows that seemed unusually thick. Something moved in the darkness ahead. Eleanor froze, her breath catching. The shape resolved into a man, tall, impossibly still, watching her from the mouth of an alley. Even in the dim light, she could see he didn't belong to this century. His coat was cut in a style decades out of fashion, black wool over darker silk, and his posture held the kind of absolute stillness that set off primal warnings in her hindbrain. Danger. She should turn back. She should run, but exhaustion weighted her limbs, and some reckless part of her, the part that had been screaming since Marcus's text arrived, whispered that it didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered. "You shouldn't be here." His voice carried easily across the space between them, smooth and low, with an accent she couldn't place. "European, perhaps, but older. This quarter is closed after sunset." "I didn't see any signs," Eleanor said, her voice rough from crying. She straightened, despite her bare feet and ruined dress. "I'll leave." Too late. He tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "They've already noticed you." They? Shadows peeled away from the alley behind him, 3 figures, moving with the same unnatural stillness. Eleanor's heart kicked against her ribs. The figures weren't walking. They were gliding, feet barely touching the ground, their faces pale as bone in the darkness. The man in the black coat moved then, positioning himself between Eleanor and the others. "She's under my protection." One of the figures laughed, the sound sharp and wrong. "Since when does the exiled king claim strays, Lucian?" "Since this stray wandered into my district wearing white." His hand moved to his side, where Eleanor glimpsed something long and silver tucked into his belt. "A blade? House law is clear. She's mine to shelter or release." "House law." The word dripped contempt. "You invoke laws you helped write, then broke." How poetic. Eleanor's mind struggled to process what she was hearing. House law? Exiled king? None of it made sense, but the violence crackling in the air was unmistakable. These people, if they were people, meant harm. The woman who'd spoken moved faster than physics should allow, suddenly 3 feet closer without appearing to cross the distance. Her eyes caught the lamplight and reflected it back, cat-like and luminous. "What if we simply take her?" The woman smiled, revealing teeth too white to sharp. "She smells of salt and tears. Grief-touched blood is always sweetest." Lucian's voice dropped to something that wasn't quite human. "Touch her, and I'll invoke trial by dawn." The 3 figures went still. "You're bluffing." the woman said, but uncertainty crept into her tone. You wouldn't risk yourself for try me. The standoff stretched, tension coiling tighter. Eleanor stood frozen, her mind screaming that she should run, but her body refusing to obey. The woman's words echoed, grief touched blood. What did that mean? Finally, the three figures melted back into the shadows, moving as silently as they'd appeared. But the woman's voice drifted back, a promise wrapped in silk. The bride who ran from mortality. How delicious. We'll be watching, Lucian. Then they were gone. Eleanor's knees gave out. She caught herself against the damp stone wall, breathing hard, her mind spinning. What who were come? Lucian turned to her, his expression unreadable in the shadows. I can explain, but not here. They'll return with others. I don't even know you. But even as she said it, Eleanor was already moving toward him. Every instinct told her this man was dangerous, but the others had been death itself. He extended a gloved hand. My name is Lucian Thorn. I'm the former lord of the shadowed house, currently in exile. And if you want to live through the night, you'll trust me for the next hour. After that, you're free to decide. Eleanor stared at his hand. She'd spent 2 years building walls around herself, vetting Marcus until she'd convinced herself he was safe. And he'd destroyed her anyway. What did she have left to lose? She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, cool, steady, solid, and he pulled her into the darkness. Chapter 2. Sanctuary and Shadow. Lucian led Eleanor through streets that shouldn't exist. They moved through passages too narrow for the maps, under archways that predated the city's founding, past doors that had forgotten how to open. He navigated without hesitation, his hand steady around hers, pulling her deeper into the old quarters maze. Eleanor's torn stockings caught on rough stone, her wedding gown already ruined, collected grime and moss from walls that wept with centuries of dampness. She should be terrified. Instead, she felt oddly detached, as if she were watching someone else stumble through the darkness, holding hands with a beautiful stranger who'd called himself an exiled king. Shock. Some distant part of her mind supplied. You're in shock. They descended stone steps, slick with age, the gas lamps vanishing behind them. Lucian produced a small glass orb from his pocket that glowed with pale blue light. No battery, no switch. Just light bleeding through his fingers like captured moonlight. Almost there, he said, his voice carrying easily in the enclosed space. Can you manage a bit further? Eleanor's feet were numb with cold, her dress impossibly heavy. Do I have a choice? Always. He glanced back, and in the blue light, his features were sharp as carved marble. I could leave you at the district border. The others wouldn't cross it. Why not? House territories are bound by blood oaths older than this city's stones. To cross uninvited is to declare war. He turned down another passage, this one so narrow Eleanor's shoulders brushed both walls. They want you, but not enough to risk that, yet. Why do they want me at all? Her voice cracked. I'm nobody. I'm someone who got left at the altar. That's all I am. Lucian stopped so suddenly she collided with his back. He turned, and the blue light cast his face in stark relief, beautiful and terrible and utterly inhuman in that moment. You're not defined by someone else's failure to see your worth. His eyes, she realized with a lurch, weren't catching the light. They were generating their own, a faint luminescence in the darkness. Remember that. Then he was moving again. Before she could respond, the passage opened into a circular chamber carved from living rock. Iron-banded doors stood in the far wall, heavy and ancient, marked with symbols Eleanor didn't recognize. Lucian pressed his palm to the wood. The symbols flared silver, and the doors swung inward without sound. Welcome to the last sanctuary of the shadowed house, Lucian said, gesturing her inside. Eleanor stepped through and stopped, breath catching. The space beyond defied the underground location. Soaring ceilings disappeared into shadow above, supported by columns carved with intricate designs that seemed to shift in her peripheral vision. Bookshelves lined the walls, floor to ceiling, filled with volumes whose spines were written in languages she didn't know. Candles floated in the air without holders, their flames perfectly still despite the draft from the doors. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, cold and dark, its mantle decorated with objects that might have been art or weapons, or both. It was beautiful, unsettling, impossible. Sit. Lucian guided her to a chair upholstered in deep burgundy velvet, positioned near the dark fireplace. You're freezing. Eleanor sank into the chair, suddenly aware of how violently she was shivering. Her feet were caked with dirt and blood from a dozen small cuts. Her dress clung damply to her skin. She should be making demands, asking questions, insisting he explain everything. Instead, she started crying, not the delicate tears she'd shed in the cathedral. These were the ugly, wrenching sobs she'd been holding back since her father lost everything 3 years ago. Since she'd rebuilt herself into someone careful and controlled. Since Marcus's text had shattered the illusion that control mattered. Lucian didn't speak. He crossed to a cabinet and returned with a heavy blanket that smelled of cedar and something older, wood smoke from fires that burned before gas lamps existed. He draped it over her shoulders, his movements careful, then retreated to give her space. Eleanor cried until her throat ached and her eyes burned. When the storm finally passed, leaving her hollow and exhausted, she found Lucian standing by the bookshelves, his back to her, one hand pressed to his side. "Are you hurt?" Her voice came out hoarse. "It's nothing." But he didn't move his hand. Eleanor stood on, shaking legs, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "Let me see." "I'm fine. You're bleeding." She'd noticed it now, the too careful way he held himself, the dark stain spreading across his coat. "Whatever happened out there, you got hurt protecting me. It will heal." He finally turned, and his face was drawn with pain. He was trying to hide. "My kind heals quickly." "Your kind?" Eleanor moved closer, despite the voice in her head screaming warnings. "Those people called you a king. They talked about house law and blood oaths. They wanted to." She couldn't finish the sentence. "Grief-touched blood is always sweetest. Drink from you?" "Yes." Lucian's eyes met hers, and the faint luminescence was unmistakable now. "Not human. Never human. I should have explained before bringing you here. You deserve to understand what you've walked into, so explain." He moved to a side table where a crystal decanter held dark red liquid. He poured a small glass, his hand steady despite the wound. When he lifted it to his lips, Eleanor saw his fingers trembling. "What is that?" Though she already knew. Some part of her had known since those creatures appeared in the alley, moving wrong, their teeth to sharp, preserved blood. Donated, properly acquired, stored under oath. He took a careful sip, and Eleanor watched color return to his face. "I haven't hunted in decades. I survive on what's given freely. You're a vampire." "Yes." The word hung in the candlelit air between them. Eleanor should run, should scream, should do anything except stand there watching this. Impossibly beautiful man drink blood while bleeding from a wound he'd taken defending her. "Prove it," she heard herself say. Lucian set down the glass and removed his coat carefully. His shirt beneath was torn and soaked with blood, his own, she assumed. He unbuttoned it slowly, revealing a wound across his ribs that should have been fatal. As Eleanor watched, the torn flesh began to knit itself together, skin crawling across muscle with visible movement. She swayed, the room tilting. Lucian caught her before she fell, supporting her weight as if it were nothing. This close, she could see that his skin held no warmth, that no pulse beat in his throat, that he didn't breathe unless he chose to. "Why?" she whispered. "Why help me? Why risk yourself?" His expression flickered, something ancient and lonely passing behind his eyes. "Because you ran into my territory wearing white on the night the moon is dark. Because house law states that the vulnerable who seek sanctuary unknowingly must be sheltered until dawn. And because." He stopped. "Because what?" "Because I know what it is to be abandoned," he said quietly. "And I wouldn't wish it on anyone." Eleanor stood in the arms of a vampire in a sanctuary hidden beneath the city's ancient bones, wearing a wedding dress stained with grime and her own shattered dreams, and felt something shift in her chest. She wasn't safe here, but she wasn't alone. Chapter 3. The space between breaths. Eleanor woke to silence so complete it pressed against her eardrums like water. For a disorienting moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then memory rushed back, the cathedral, the alley, the impossible sanctuary beneath the city. She sat up on the velvet chaise, where she must have fallen asleep, still wrapped in the cedar-scented blanket. Her ruined wedding dress had been replaced with a silk robe the color of midnight, soft against her skin. She didn't remember changing. The candles still floated in their positions around the room, their flames motionless. No windows broke the stone walls. No clock marked the passing hours. The fireplace remained cold and dark. Eleanor had no idea if she'd slept for minutes or days. Lucian sat across the room at a massive desk, utterly still, reading a leather-bound book by candlelight. He hadn't changed position since she'd looked at him. No shift of weight, no restless movement, nothing. He simply existed in that space, like a statue waiting to come alive. Eleanor watched him, counting. 1 minute, 2, 3. He didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't move at all, except to turn pages with precise, measured movements every 47 seconds. The wrongness of it crawled up her spine. You're awake. Lucian looked up, and life flooded back into him, a performance of humanity so seamless she almost missed the transition. He closed the book and stood, moving with fluid grace. How do you feel? Different clothes. She pulled the robe tighter. Did you? I left them folded outside the alcove screen. He gestured to a carved wooden partition she hadn't noticed before. You were shivering in your sleep. The dress was making you ill. Eleanor stood, testing her body. Her feet had been cleaned and wrapped in soft bandages. Her hair had been freed from its elaborate wedding style, falling loose around her shoulders. She felt cared for in a way that should have been invasive, but somehow wasn't. What time is it? 3 hours past midnight. Lucian moved to the side table and poured dark liquid into 2 glasses, 1 crystal, 1 ceramic. He brought her the ceramic one. Tea, still hot. I forget that humans need warmth. Eleanor accepted it, wrapping her hands around the cup. The heat felt glorious. She sipped carefully, chamomile and something else, honey and herbs. You don't drink tea. No, what do you drink? Besides, she couldn't say it. Blood. He said it simply, without shame. Only blood. Food and drink lost their appeal to centuries ago. I still remember the taste of bread and wine, but it's like recalling a dream. To centuries. Eleanor sat back down, her legs suddenly unsteady. How old are you? Old enough to have known 3 languages that are now dead. Lucian returned to his chair, but didn't sit. Instead, he paced 3 steps left, turn, 3 steps right, measured, controlled. Old enough to have made choices I can't undo. Eleanor watched him move. You're restless. The sun will rise in 4 hours. His hand went to his side where the wound had been. I should have fed properly after the fight. Preserved blood isn't enough when healing, so feed. The words came out before she could stop them. Lucian went completely still again, that unnatural, statue-like stillness. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. That's not how it works. How does it work? Consent. Always consent. He turned away, gripping the back of a chair. Blood taken by force is poison. Blood given in fear tastes of ashes. Blood given freely, knowingly, with genuine willing. That's the only sustenance that matters. House law demands it. My own conscience demands it. So ask. No, the word came out sharp. He turned back to her, and his eyes blazed with that inner light. You don't understand what you're offering. Then explain it to me. Eleanor set down her tea and stood, the silk robe, whispering around her legs. You've told me you're a vampire. You've shown me your world. Now tell me the truth about what happens if someone says yes. Lucian closed his eyes. Feeding creates a bond. Temporary, but real. The donor feels what the vampire feels, hunger satisfied, wounds healing, sometimes pleasure. Some seek it out. Some become addicted to the sensation. It's why consent matters. It's too easy to manipulate someone into giving more than they should, and you don't want that power over me. I don't want to be another person who takes from you. His voice dropped to something raw. You've been bled dry by everyone around you, your father's partner who stole your security, the man who abandoned you at the altar. I won't be added to that list. Eleanor moved closer, drawn by the pain in his words. What if I'm offering because I choose to, not because I'm being manipulated? You're in shock, traumatized, vulnerable. He stepped back, maintaining distance. I've lived long enough to recognize when someone is making decisions from a place of damage rather than strength. Don't. The word came out harder than she intended. Don't tell me I'm too broken to make my own choices. I've had enough people deciding what I can handle. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? She was close enough now to see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands had become fists. You saved my life. You've been nothing but honorable. So why are you trying so hard to push me away? Because everyone I've sheltered ends up hurt. The admission seemed torn from somewhere deep. The last person under my protection died because I failed to see the threat until it was too late. That's why I was exiled. I broke house law trying to avenge them. I won't survive watching it happen again. The words hung between them, laden with grief. Older than Eleanor's entire life. How long ago? She asked softly. 73 years. Lucian turned away. Not long, by vampire standards. Still yesterday, by mine. Eleanor understood then the careful distance he maintained, the way he avoided touch, the precision of his every action. He was protecting himself as much as her. I'm not asking to stay forever, she said. You said I could decide after an hour. It's been longer than that. So I'm deciding let me stay until sunrise. Let me help if I can. And then, if you still want me to leave, I'll go. It's dangerous. More dangerous than walking through the old quarter alone in a wedding dress? She managed a weak smile. I think I've already chosen danger over safety. Lucian studied her for a long moment, and Eleanor forced herself to meet his luminous gaze without flinching. She could see him calculating risks, weighing her words against whatever demons haunted him. Finally, he inclined his head. Until sunrise. But you follow my instructions without question. If those three return, agreed, and Eleanor. He moved to the floating candles, touching each one. They dimmed in response, lowering the light to something softer, more intimate. Thank you. For what? For not running. He paused. Most do, once they truly understand what I am. Eleanor pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, suddenly aware of how small the space between them felt. Where would I run to? Back to a wedding that didn't happen? Back to a life I built on the foundation of someone else's lies? You could build a new life. Start over somewhere safe, maybe. She settled back onto the chaise. But for tonight, I'd rather be here, with you. In the impossible room under the city, with the floating candles and the vampire who reads books that should have crumbled to dust centuries ago, something shifted in Lucian's expression. Surprise. Maybe, or the beginning of something that might have been hope, until sunrise. Then, he said quietly, until sunrise. Chapter 4. What the darkness holds. The hours before dawn moved differently in the sanctuary. Lucian showed Eleanor the library shelves that climbed 30 feet to meet shadow, filled with books bound in leather and cloth and materials she couldn't identify. Some volumes were chained to the walls. Others sat behind glass marked with the same silver symbols that had opened the iron doors. Dangerous knowledge, Lucian explained, his fingers trailing along a sealed case. Spells that shouldn't be spoken. Histories that were meant to burn. The accumulated secrets of a house that no longer exists. Why keep them locked away instead of destroying them? Because forgetting is more dangerous than remembering. He pulled a slim volume from an upper shelf without needing a ladder, his movements inhumanly graceful. The shadowed house fell because we forgot what we were capable of. We forgot that power without conscience becomes tyranny. Eleanor accepted the book he offered. The cover was worn smooth by countless hands, the title embossed in faded gold, The Ethics of Eternity. Is this why you were exiled? Because you tried to hold your house accountable? Because I killed another vampire without trial. Lucian's expression hardened. The one who murdered the person under my protection. House law is absolute. No vampire may end another's existence without formal accusation and judgment before the Council of Lords. I broke that law. I was cast out, and rightfully so. But they murdered. Justice and vengeance aren't the same thing. He took the book back, replacing it carefully. I learned that too late. Eleanor watched him move through the library with the ease of long familiarity, touching spines like old friends, occasionally pulling a volume to show her. He spoke of the shadowed house in the past tense, as if it were a ghost he carried everywhere. Were you the only one left? She asked. When they exiled you? No, there were others, younger vampires I'd turned, elders who'd survived centuries of house politics. But exile from your own house is exile from your family. They couldn't acknowledge me without risking their own standing. He paused before a portrait half hidden in shadow. I haven't spoken to any of them in 70 years. The portrait showed a gathering of figures in formal dress from another century, men and women with the same luminous quality Lucian possessed. Their faces beautiful and cold and utterly inhuman. In the center stood a younger version of Lucian, though younger only meant less weary. His hand rested on the shoulder of a woman with dark hair and fierce eyes. Who was she? Eleanor asked. The one you couldn't protect? Lucian's silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, her name was Isabel, a scholar who specialized in pre-Roman texts. She came to me seeking access to the house archives for her research. I granted permission. She visited regularly over the course of a year, and we became, he paused, friends. Perhaps more than friends, though we never named it. Eleanor heard the grief beneath his careful words. What happened? Another house wanted access to our archives. I refused. They threatened war. I called their bluff. his hand clenched into a fist. They couldn't strike at me directly without violating house law, so they struck at her. Made it look like a random attack, human violence. But I knew, and when I found proof, I stopped asking for justice and took it myself. You loved her. I cared for her, deeply, and my arrogance got her killed. Lucian turned away from the portrait. I thought house politics were a game where the rules protected everyone. I forgot that rules only matter when those in power choose to follow them. Eleanor moved closer, drawn by the raw pain in his voice. That's why you invoked house law for me. Even though you were exiled, even though it cost you, house law is all I have left of who I was. The exiled king who still believes rules matter, even when they failed him. He laughed, bitter and broken. Pathetic, isn't it? No, Eleanor reached out before she could stop herself, her hand finding his arm. His skin was cool through the silk of his shirt, but solid, real. It's brave. You could have let those vampires take me. You could have walked away. But you didn't, because your conscience demanded you act. Lucian stared at her hand on his arm as if it were a foreign object. You should hate me. I've dragged you into house politics. You don't understand. Put you at risk from vampires who now know you're under my protection. Or you saved me from a death I wouldn't have understood until it was too late. Eleanor didn't move her hand. I choose to believe that version. Why? The question came out raw. Why aren't you afraid of me? I am afraid. She forced herself to honesty. But I've been afraid for 3 years, afraid of losing what little I had left, afraid of trusting wrong again, afraid of ending up like my father, broken by other people's cruelty. Tonight, at least, I'm afraid of something real instead of shadows in my own mind. Lucian covered her hand with his own, the gesture careful, as if she might shatter. You're stronger than you know. So are you. You're just better at hiding it. Something shifted in his expression, walls lowering, grief surfacing. For a moment, Eleanor saw past the careful control to the loneliness beneath. 2 centuries of existence, 70 years of exile, watching everyone he'd known grow distant or die, or forget him. When the sun rises, he said quietly, I'll need to rest. Daylight doesn't destroy us, that's a myth, but it weakens us. I'll be vulnerable, healing. If you want to leave, that's when you should go. And if I don't want to leave, then you'll need to understand what staying means. He released her hand and moved to a cabinet built into the wall. Inside, crystal decanters held preserved blood in varying shades of red. My supply will last another month, maybe 2. After that, I'll need to arrange for more. Staying here means witnessing what I am, not the vampire in the storybooks, but the reality. The feeding, the otherness, the small deaths that come with immortality. Eleanor studied the decanters, forcing herself to see them clearly. Not wine, not some romantic fantasy. Blood preserved under oath, given freely by people she'd never meet. This was Lucian's existence, neither monster nor prince, but something caught between. I'm not afraid of the truth, she said. I'm afraid of more lies. Then I'll give you truth. Lucian closed the cabinet. I'm tired, Eleanor. Not physically, vampires don't tire that way. But tired of being alone. Tired of maintaining this sanctuary for a house that no longer exists. Tired of reading books no one else will ever see and remembering people no one else remembers. When you ran into my territory tonight, you were the first person I'd spoken to in 4 months. The admission hung in the candlelit air between them. 4 months, Eleanor repeated. I'm not good company. I've forgotten how to be. He attempted a smile, but it came out sad. You should leave. Build your new life somewhere the sun shines and the rules make sense. Maybe. Eleanor moved to the chaise and settled into it, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. But for now, tell me about your books. Tell me about the languages you spoke that are dead now. Tell me what the world was like before gas lamps and cities and GPS. Lucian stared at her. Why? Because I want to know. Because you've been alone too long. And because she paused, searching for the right words. Because you saw me at my worst tonight and didn't flinch. Let me return the favor. Chapter 5. The language of Dan. Lucian spoke, and the sanctuary came alive with memory. He told her about Constantinople before it fell, about libraries that burned while scholars wept. He described the taste of wine pressed from grapes that no longer existed, the sound of music played on instruments now displayed in museums. He spoke languages she'd never heard, ancient Greek rolling off his tongue like water, Latin soft as prayer, something older that had no name she recognized. Eleanor listened, wrapped in the cedar blanket, watching candlelight play across his features. As he spoke, he paced 3 steps, turned, 3 steps back, but the movement seemed less restless now, more like a dance with memories. You miss it, she said when he paused. Not just the people. The whole world, every vampire does. Lucian stopped before the cold fireplace, one hand pressed to the dark mantle. We're collectors of lost things. The world moves forward, and we remain, carrying what everyone else forgets. That sounds exhausting. It is. He turned, and something vulnerable flickered in his expression. But tonight, telling you, it feels less like a burden, more like sharing treasure I'd forgotten I possessed. Eleanor's chest tightened at the admission. She stood, leaving the blanket behind, and crossed to where he waited. This close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, not age, but whatever remained of the expressions he'd worn in life. What was your name? Before you became Lucian Thorn? Lucianus Aurelius Corvinus. The old name fit his mouth differently, formal and ancient. Third son of a merchant family in Rome. I studied philosophy and law, badly, and spent more time in taverns than libraries. I was 27 when I died, Eleanor echoed. Turned, if you prefer the euphemism. But yes, everything I was ended that night. What walks around now is something else. Something that remembers being Lucianus, but can never be him again. His hand moved to his chest, where no heart beat. You learn to carry death inside you. It becomes familiar, almost comfortable. Do you regret it? The turning? Every day for the first century. Now, he considered, I regret what I've lost. But I've also witnessed wonders that mortal life couldn't contain. I've read texts that crumbled to dust in my hands, the last person to know their words. I've watched cities rise from nothing and fall to ruin. I've loved people who've been dead for longer than your country has existed. Eleanor reached for his hand before she could reconsider. His fingers were cool against hers, steady, real. You're lonely, profoundly. He didn't pull away. Loneliness is the price of immortality. You watch everyone age and die. You can't form real connections because you'll outlive them all. You learn to maintain distance, or you spend eternity grieving. Is that why you haven't fed from a willing donor? Because you're keeping distance? Lucian's grip tightened slightly. I haven't fed from anyone in 73 years. Not since Isabel died. Preserved blood sustains, but it's empty nutrition without connection. I chose that emptiness because connection means vulnerability. And vulnerability killed the last person I cared for. So you're not living. You're just existing. Yes, the admission came out quiet. I'm a ghost maintaining a sanctuary for a house that's forgotten me. I read books and count centuries, and try not to think about how many more I'll have to endure. Eleanor stepped closer until barely a breath separated them. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. I'm sorry. I shouldn't burden you with. Stop. She squeezed his hand. Stop apologizing for being honest. You asked why I'm not afraid of you. This is why. Because underneath all the vampire otherness, you're just someone who's been hurt so badly you've forgotten how to heal. Lucian stared at her, something breaking behind his careful control. You see too much. Maybe you've been invisible too long. Eleanor lifted her free hand to his face, her fingers trembling slightly as they touched his to cool skin. Tell me something. Does preserved blood work as well as the other kind? No, his voice had gone rough. It keeps me functional, but barely. Real feeding, consensual feeding heals faster, sustains longer. The bond creates an exchange of energy that preserved blood can't replicate. Then why? Because I don't deserve it. The words came out harsh. I failed, Isabel. I broke house law. I'm exiled and hollow and dangerous. I survive on emptiness because that's all I've earned. Eleanor's heart cracked at the self-loathing in his voice. She understood it too well. The voice that said you weren't good enough, didn't deserve happiness, had somehow earned your suffering. She'd carried that voice since her father's business partner stole everything. Since Marcus proved her trust was worthless. Listen to me. She forced Lucian to meet her eyes. I don't know all the rules of your world. I don't understand house politics or blood oaths or whatever happened 70 years ago. But I know what it's like to punish yourself for someone else's cruelty. And I know that surviving isn't the same as living. Eleanor, you saved me tonight. Not because you had to. Not because some law demanded it. You saved me because underneath all this self-imposed exile, you still care. You're still fighting to be better than your circumstances. She took a shaky breath. So let me care back. Let me help you heal, even if it's just for tonight. You don't know what you're offering, then show me. The words hung between them, weighted with possibility and danger. Lucian's eyes blazed brighter, his control visibly fraying. Eleanor could feel his hand trembling in hers, such a human response from someone who claimed he wasn't human anymore. The bond, he said carefully, isn't just physical. You'd feel everything. I feel the hunger satisfied, the wound closing, but also the loneliness, the grief, 2 centuries of accumulated sorrow flooding through you all at once. It could break you, or it could break both of us out of the prisons we've built. Eleanor's voice steadied. I'm tired of being afraid, Lucian. Tired of playing it safe and getting hurt anyway. Tonight, I want to choose something brave, something real, even if it's dangerous. This isn't. A sound shattered the moment, a sharp crack echoing through the sanctuary like breaking glass. The floating candles flickered. The silver symbols on the iron doors flared bright and urgent. Lucian spun toward the entrance, his entire body going rigid. They're here. Who? The Crimson House. His voice had gone flat, emotionless, a soldier assessing threat. They've brought others. They're testing the wards. Another crack, louder. One of the door symbols went dark. How many? Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. At least a dozen. Lucian moved to the cabinet and pulled out a blade that gleamed silver white in the candlelight. House law clearly states you're under my protection. They can't take you by force, but they can challenge my claim. What does that mean? He looked at her, and his expression held centuries of grim knowledge. It means they'll try to kill me, and if they succeed, you become unclaimed territory, free for the taking. The doors shuddered. Another symbol died. How long before they break through? Eleanor asked. Minutes. Maybe less. Lucian pressed the blade into her hand. Silver. It won't kill a vampire, but it will slow one down. Aim for the chest or throat. Don't hesitate. Eleanor's fingers closed around the hilt. The weight felt wrong, to heavy, to real. I don't know how to fight. Then stay behind me and run if I fall. Lucian, promise me, Eleanor. If I can't protect you, you run. The dawn is 2 hours away. Make it to sunrise, and they can't follow you into daylight. Promise. She wanted to argue, wanted to say she wouldn't leave him, but the look in his eyes, ancient and determined and already grieving, stopped her. I promise, she whispered. The final symbol shattered. The iron doors exploded inward, and darkness poured through, bringing death with it. Chapter 6. Blood and Silverthy moved like water given predatory form, a dozen vampires flowing through the shattered doors with inhuman speed. The woman from the alley led them, her smile sharp as broken glass in the candlelight. Lucian Thorne, her voice carried mockery like perfume. Still playing protector? Still pretending house law means anything to the exiled? Lucian positioned himself between Eleanor and the advancing figures, the silver blade steady in his hand. House law binds all vampires, Morgana. Even the Crimson House can't ignore it without consequences. Consequences? Morgana laughed, the sound cutting. You're alone, outcast, protecting a human who wandered into territory you barely hold. There's no house left to enforce your claim, no council to hear your appeal. You're just a ghost clinging to rules that died with your authority. 2 vampires split off, circling toward the library shelves. Eleanor pressed her back against Lucian's, the silver blade trembling in her grip. Her mind raced 12 against 2, except she wasn't even a 2. She was a liability, a human with a weapon she didn't know how to use. The sanctuary recognizes me, Lucian said quietly. The wards answered my blood. That makes this space sovereign territory under the old laws. You violate them at your own risk. Old laws, Morgana gestured, and her vampires closed in. How appropriate. Lucian Aurelius Corvinus, always the scholar, always the idealist. Did philosophy comfort you during your exile? Did your precious books keep you warm at night? Lucian moved. The sanctuary exploded into violence so fast, Eleanor barely tracked it. Lucian became a blur of motion, his blade singing through the air. The first vampire who reached him fell back, chest smoking where silver had scored flesh. The second ducked his strike and lashed out with claws that shouldn't exist, fingers lengthening into talons that caught Lucian's shoulder and tore. Blood bloomed across his shirt. Impossibly dark, Eleanor screamed, the sound swallowed by the chaos. More vampires pressed forward. Lucian fought like something from a nightmare, graceful and brutal, every movement precise, every strike calculated to disable rather than kill. But there were too many. For every one he drove back, 2 more closed in. A vampire broke past him, lunging for Eleanor. She swung the blade blindly. It connected with the vampire's arm, and the creature hissed, recoiling. Silver burned where it touched, smoke rising from the wound. Eleanor stumbled backward, her heel catching on something, a leather strap attached to one of the chain books. The book, her mind flashed to Lucian's words, dangerous knowledge. Spells that shouldn't be spoken. Lucian. She grabbed the chain book, yanking it free with strength born of desperation. The dangerous ones, what do they do? Don't. His voice carried over the sound of combat. You can't. A vampire's fist caught his ribs. Eleanor heard bones crack. Lucian went down on one knee, blood streaming from a dozen wounds. Morgana moved in, her smile widening. Last chance, Lucian. Release your claim. Walk away. Live another century in your pathetic exile. Eleanor looked at the book in her hands. The cover was marked with symbols similar to those on the doors, silver inlaid in patterns that hurt to look at directly. She couldn't read the language, but something about the shapes felt significant, purposeful. Lucian had said spells shouldn't be spoken. But these weren't words. They were symbols, patterns, and patterns could be. She ripped a page free. No. Lucian's shout came too late. The symbols flared brilliant white the moment they left. The book's binding, so bright Eleanor had to shield her eyes. The vampires froze, hands raised against the light. Morgana snarled, backing toward the door. What have you done? Her voice held genuine fear. Eleanor didn't know, but she could feel power humming through the page, singing against her skin like static electricity. She lifted it higher, and the light intensified. The vampires closest to her fell back, smoking where the light touched them. The ward sigils, Lucian gasped, still on his knees. His eyes were wide with something between horror and awe. You freed the ward sigils. Eleanor, you need to. The page ignited, not with fire, but with light so pure it seemed to come from somewhere beyond the physical world. It spread from Eleanor's hands up her arms, wrapping around her like silk made of starlight. She didn't burn. The light welcomed her, recognized something in her that made it sing louder. The vampires screamed. Even Morgana, ancient and powerful, staggered back as if struck. The light pushed them toward the broken doors, relentless as tide, until they had no choice but to flee or face whatever force Eleanor had unleashed. This isn't over. Morgana's voice echoed from the passage. She can't hold that forever. We'll return. And next time the iron doors slammed shut with thunderous force. The silver symbols reappeared on their surface, blazing bright, then settled into a steady glow. The ward had been renewed. Eleanor stood in the center of the sanctuary, light still cascading from her hands, trying to understand what had just happened. The page had dissolved into ash, but the power remained, flowing through her like water finding its course. Eleanor, Lucian's voice was weak. You need to release it. Ground it back into the sanctuary's foundation before it consumes you. How? Her voice sounded strange, echoing with harmonics that shouldn't exist. Press your hands to the floor. Let it flow back where it came from. Trust the stone to accept it. Eleanor dropped to her knees and pressed her palms flat against the cold floor. The light surged out of her in a rush that left her gasping, sinking into stone carved centuries ago for exactly this purpose. The symbols throughout the sanctuary flared once, twice, then settled into peaceful luminescence. The silence that followed felt deafening. Eleanor looked up to find Lucian collapsed against a bookshelf, his shirt soaked with blood from wounds that weren't healing. His breathing came labored, strange, since she'd learned he didn't need to breathe. His skin had gone ashen, the luminescence in his eyes barely flickering. Lucian, she crawled to him, her hands shaking. You're not healing. Too much damage. Too little. Proper sustenance. His eyes struggled to focus. Preserved blood won't be enough. Not for this. Then take what you need. Eleanor pushed her hair back from her neck before fear could stop her. You said consent matters. I'm giving it, freely, knowingly. Whatever words make it right, I'm saying them. Eleanor, you don't understand, you're dying. Her voice broke. I just watched you fight 12 vampires to protect me. I freed something I shouldn't have. And you're still trying to keep me safe. So stop being noble and let me save you for once. Lucian's hand found hers, his grip weak. The bond. It will change things between us. Good. Eleanor moved closer, her heart hammering, but her resolve steady. Because I'm tired of distance. Tired of walls. And I'm not watching you die because you're too afraid to let someone in. His eyes met hers, and she saw the moment his control finally shattered. Need, fear, hope, and hunger all warred across his features. Stay with me, he whispered. Stay present. If it becomes too much, tell me and I'll stop. I trust you. You shouldn't. But he was already moving, his hand cradling the back of her head with infinite gentleness. But God's help me. I'm grateful you do. His lips found her throat, cool against her racing pulse. Eleanor felt his hesitation, decades of denial warring with desperate need. Then his fangs pierced her skin, and the world dissolved into sensation beyond anything she'd imagined. Chapter 7. The bond unbroken bloomed sharp and bright, then dissolved into something Eleanor had no name for. She felt Lucian's hunger not as her own sensation, but as an echo singing through her veins. 2 centuries of denial, 73 years of emptiness, all of it crashing through the connection his bite had opened. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt his gratitude beneath the hunger, his wonder at being allowed this closeness after so long alone. I'm sorry, his voice whispered through her mind, though his lips never left her throat. So sorry, I'll be quick. I promise I'll don't. She thought back, and felt his shock ripple through the bond. Don't rush. Take what you need. His arms tightened around her, cradling her against his chest. She felt his wounds closing, flesh knitting, bones settling, pain receding like tide. The preserved blood had kept him functional, but this was life returning to something that had been slowly dying. Energy flooded through him, and through the bond. Eleanor experienced it as if it were happening to her own body, but beneath the physical healing, she felt everything else. The loneliness hit her first, an ache so profound it made her earlier grief seem shallow. He'd been alone for so long that solitude had become his natural state. He'd forgotten what it felt like to be genuinely known, to be witnessed in all his broken pieces and not rejected. Then came the fear, not of her, but for her. Terror that he'd take too much, hurt her, fail to protect her the way he'd failed Isabel. The memory surfaced through the bond, a woman with dark hair and fierce eyes, her body broken in an alley, her blood cooling on his hands while he screamed at a sky that didn't care. I'm here, Eleanor thought, projecting the words through the connection with all the force she could muster. I'm alive. You saved me. You're saving me right now. She felt his control waver, grief and relief tangling together. His drinking slowed, became more measured, almost reverent. This wasn't just feeding. It was communion. 2 people starving for connection, finally allowing themselves to be vulnerable. Eleanor's fingers found his hair, threading through the dark strands. The gesture seemed to undo something in him. She felt his walls crumbling, the careful distance he maintained shattering under the weight of genuine care. He'd been performing humanity for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to simply be himself, monster and man and everything between. You're not a monster, she thought. You don't know what I've done. The lives I've taken. The choices I've made. I know what you're doing right now. Fighting to stay in control even though you're starving. Giving me a choice when you could have simply taken. That's who you are. His fangs withdrew carefully, and he sealed the wound with his tongue, an oddly tender gesture that sent shivers through her. The bond remained, thrumming between them like a second heartbeat. Eleanor sagged against him, suddenly exhausted, her head swimming with the aftereffects of blood loss and emotional overload. Easy. Lucian's voice sounded stronger now, steadier. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, carrying her to the chaise. You need to rest. The bond will fade in a few hours, but until then, you'll feel echoes of my emotions. I felt more than echoes. Eleanor's voice came out weak. I felt everything. 200 years of everything. I'm sorry. He settled her on the velvet cushions, pulling the cedar blanket around her shoulders. His color had returned, the ashen pallor replaced by something closer to living warmth. The wounds that had been bleeding freely were now pink scars already fading. The first feeding creates the strongest bond. It shouldn't have been that intense, but I took more than I intended. You were too generous. Stop apologizing. Eleanor caught his hand before he could pull away. I felt your loneliness. Yes, your grief. But I also felt your strength, your integrity. Everything you've survived and somehow remained yourself. You're not broken, Lucian. You're just alone. And that's not the same thing. He stared at their joined hands. I felt you too. Through the bond, your pain. What that man did to you. What your father's partner stole. All the ways people have failed you. His thumb traced small circles on her palm. You shouldn't trust so easily. Not after everything you've endured. Maybe I shouldn't. Eleanor managed a weak smile. But I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions. Marcus was supposed to be safe. I vetted him for 2 years. And he still abandoned me. So maybe safe doesn't actually exist. Or maybe you've just had extraordinarily bad luck with people, present company excluded? She squeezed his hand. I'm a vampire who just drank your blood in an underground sanctuary while rival houses plot your death. I'm not sure I qualify as good luck, but something in his expression had softened, the careful distance he maintained slipping. Eleanor felt the bond humming between them fainter now, but still present. She could sense his emotions as gentle pressure against her awareness, relief, gratitude, and underneath everything, a fragile hope he was trying desperately not to acknowledge. The wards, she said, changing the subject before the intimacy became overwhelming. What did I do? That book, those symbols, you renewed the sanctuary's protection using knowledge you shouldn't have been able to access. Lucian settled into the chair across from her, though he kept hold of her hand. Ward sigils are written in old speech, the language vampires spoke before humans had writing. They respond to intent more than pronunciation. You couldn't read the words, but you understood the purpose. And somehow the wards recognized you. Is that normal? No, his expression was troubled. Ward sigils only respond to house members or those who've been blood sworn. You're neither. Yet they accepted your command as if you had every right to wield them. Maybe because I was trying to protect you. Perhaps, but he didn't sound convinced. Or perhaps there's something about you the wards recognized. Something I don't yet understand. Eleanor wanted to pursue that thread, but exhaustion was pulling her under. The blood loss combined with the emotional intensity of the bond left her feeling hollowed out, scraped clean. How long until sunrise? An hour, perhaps less. Lucian glanced toward the ceiling, as if he could sense the approaching dawn through stone and earth. I'll need to rest soon. The day sleep isn't negotiable when the sun rises. Consciousness becomes difficult. Will you be vulnerable? If they come back, the renewed wards will hold them. And you've given me strength I haven't possessed in decades. He lifted their joined hands, studying where her pulse beat steadily beneath pale skin. I should have fed properly years ago. Pride kept me from seeking willing donors. I told myself I didn't deserve the connection. And now? Now I'm beginning to think loneliness was the greater sin. He released her hand carefully, as if parting cost him. Rest, Eleanor. I'll wake you before I succumb to day sleep. We need to discuss what happens next. What does happen next? Lucian's expression clouded. The Crimson House won't accept tonight's defeat. Morgana leads them, and she's never forgotten a slight. They'll regroup, plan a new approach. And next time, they'll bring more than a dozen. How many vampires are we talking about? The Crimson House has at least 50 active members. Maybe more. He moved to the cabinet and poured another glass of preserved blood sustenance to maintain what her donation had begun. They're one of the 7 great houses that govern vampire society. I'm one exiled vampire with a sanctuary that barely qualifies as territory. The mathematics aren't favorable. Eleanor absorbed this, trying to think past the exhaustion. Then we need allies. Other houses who'd oppose the Crimson House. I have no allies. That's what exile means. You had a house once. The Shadowed House. You said there were others vampires you'd turned, elders who survived. Eleanor pushed herself upright despite her body's protests. What if we contacted them? Explained the situation? They can't acknowledge me without risking their own standing. But they could acknowledge me. The idea crystallized as she spoke. I'm not exiled. I'm just a human under your protection. If I asked for help, no, the word came out hard. I won't let you put yourself at risk to solve my problems, our problems. They attacked both of us tonight. Because of me. Because I claimed you. Lucian set down his glass with enough force to crack the crystal. This is exactly what I feared. You're already entangled in house politics. You don't understand. Planning strategies that could get you killed. I should have let you leave at dawn. But you won't. Eleanor met his eyes steadily. Because you're not alone anymore. And neither am I. The bond thrummed between them, carrying truth he couldn't deny. Chapter 8. Dawn's mercy. Eleanor woke to find Lucian standing before the cold fireplace, motionless as carved stone. She'd drifted off without meaning to, exhaustion claiming her mid-conversation. The bond had faded to a whisper still present, but distant enough that his emotions felt like echoes heard through water. Dawn must be close. She could sense his consciousness struggling against the pull of day sleep, fighting to remain alert until she woke. You should have rested, she said quietly. He didn't turn. I needed to keep watch. Make sure the wards held. And did they? Yes, no one's attempted to breach them since the renewal. He paused. What you did tonight activating those sigils, that kind of power doesn't appear randomly. The ward magic responded to you as if you had vampire blood. But you don't. I would have sensed it when I fed. Eleanor pushed herself upright, ignoring the dizziness that came with the movement. Her neck throbbed where he'd bitten her, a dull ache that somehow felt intimate rather than painful. Maybe I'm just lucky, or maybe you're something the houses will want to study, dissect, use. His voice held grim certainty. I've put you in more danger by letting you stay, by feeding from you, by creating a bond that links us in ways other vampires can sense. Stop. Eleanor stood on unsteady legs and crossed to him. Stop trying to carry all the guilt. We both made choices tonight. You made choices without understanding the consequences. He finally turned to face her, and the anguish in his expression stole her breath. The bond we share, other vampires can smell it on you now. They'll know you've been claimed, that you've given blood willingly. Some will see it as a challenge. Others will see it as an invitation to test my strength. And the Crimson House will use it as evidence that I'm building power again, trying to resurrect the shadowed house. Are you? What? Trying to build power again. Resurrect your house. Eleanor held his gaze. Because if you are, maybe I could help. Maybe that's why the wards responded to me. Lucian laughed, the sound broken and bitter. I'm a ghost, Eleanor, a relic. I have no desire to play house politics again. That game cost me everything I cared about. Then what do you want? The question hung between them. Lucian's eyes, still luminous despite the approaching dawn, searched her face as if looking for an answer he didn't dare speak aloud. I want. He stopped, started again. For 73 years, I wanted nothing. Survival, solitude, penance. But tonight, when I thought they might kill me and take you, his hand lifted to her face, hovering just shy of contact. I want more time, with you, to show you the languages that are dead, to teach you about vampire lore, to hear you laugh without the shadow of that bastard's betrayal haunting you. I want mornings that don't feel like dying and nights that don't feel like prisons. Eleanor's heart clenched. She covered his hand with hers, pressing it to her cheek. His skin held the warmth her blood had given him, making him feel almost human. Then take it. Take the time. Stop trying to push me away for my own good. I can't protect you and keep you close. Those are mutually exclusive. Maybe I don't need protection as much as I need honesty. She turned her head, pressing a kiss to his palm. The gesture was impulsive, intimate, and she felt his sharp intake of breath through the fading bond. You felt what I carry, Lucian. The wounds Marcus left, the betrayal, the fear of trusting wrong. But you also felt something else. What? That I'm stronger than my damage. That I survive. That I'm choosing to be here not because I'm broken, but because I'm brave enough to try something real. Eleanor stepped closer until she could feel the unnatural stillness of his body. So stop treating me like I'm fragile. I activated ward sigils tonight. I held off 12 vampires with magic. I don't understand. I gave you my blood and felt 2 centuries of grief pour through me, and I didn't break. Lucian's control visibly wavered. You should have broken. Anyone else would have, but I didn't. So maybe stop deciding what I can handle, and start trusting that I know my own limits. His thumb traced her cheekbone, the touch feather-light. You terrify me. Good. You terrify me too. Now or even. The almost smile that crossed his face transformed him, made him look less like an ancient vampire, and more like the Roman scholar he'd been centuries ago. Young, hopeful, alive. Then the moment shattered. Lucian staggered, catching himself against the mantel. His skin lost the warmth it had held, going ashen. His eyes dimmed, the inner light flickering. Dawn, he gasped. I'm sorry, I thought I had more time. Eleanor caught him as his legs gave out, his weight suddenly heavy in her arms. What do I do? How do I help? Darkness. I need complete darkness. His words slurred. There's a chamber. Behind the bookcase. Left wall. Press the third book from the corner. Eleanor half carried, half dragged him to the indicated shelf. Her hands shook as she searched for the right book, leather-bound, unmarked, innocuous among thousands. She pressed it, and a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a passage that descended into absolute black. I can't see, she said, panic rising. Follow the wall. 20 steps down. There's a bed, stone, cold. His eyes were closing, consciousness slipping away. Eleanor, lock the door. Behind you. Silver bolt. Don't let anyone in. I won't, I promise. She guided him down the stairs, counting steps in the darkness. Her hand found his chest still, no heartbeat, no breath. He was dying again, in whatever way vampires died. When the sun rose, the chamber was exactly where he'd set a small room carved from rock, holding only a stone platform covered in dark fabric. Eleanor helped him onto it, arranging his limbs carefully. In the absolute darkness, he looked like a corpse. No breath, no movement, nothing. Lucian? Her voice cracked out and no response. Eleanor stood in the darkness beside a vampire in day sleep, her neck throbbing where he'd fed, the bond between them reduced to barely a whisper. Her hands found his face cold now, wax-like, but she could feel the faintest hum of something beneath the stillness. Life, power, whatever force animated the undead. She pressed her lips to his forehead, a blessing. A promise, a prayer to whatever gods might listen to women who'd fallen for monsters. I'll be here when you wake, she whispered. I'm not running. Not from this. Not from you. Then she climbed the 20 steps back up, found the silver bolt, and locked the door behind her. The sanctuary felt different in Lucian's absence, larger, colder, weighted with centuries of accumulated silence. Eleanor sank onto the chaise, exhaustion and adrenaline crash hitting simultaneously. The floating candles had dimmed to barely visible flames. The books surrounding her held knowledge she couldn't read. And somewhere above, the sun was rising on a world that had no idea vampires walked among them. She should be terrified, should be planning escape, should be doing anything except sitting here, touching the mark on her neck, feeling the ghost of a bond that connected her to something impossible. Instead, Eleanor pulled the blanket tight around her shoulders and settled into wait. She'd made her choice. Now she'd live with the consequences. Chapter 9. The teaching of Shadow. Eleanor spent the daylight hours learning to read a vampire's life through the objects he kept. The sanctuary revealed itself slowly, like a book written in a language she was just beginning to understand. She explored carefully, touching nothing that seemed too precious, but allowing herself to witness the accumulated existence of someone who'd lived long enough to see empires fall. The books were organized not by subject but by age, oldest near the back, newest toward the front. She found medical texts from the Renaissance next to philosophical treatises from ancient Greece, poetry in languages she recognized and scripts she didn't. Every volume showed signs of use, corners worn smooth, pages marked with careful notes in Lucian's precise hand. He'd lived here for 73 years, reading, remembering, maintaining a sanctuary for a house that had forgotten him. Eleanor found his clothes hanging in a wardrobe hidden behind a tapestry, all black, all formal, all cut from patterns decades out of fashion. As if he'd stopped caring about the present the day Isabel died. As if he'd been frozen in grief, unable to move forward. She understood that impulse to will. In a small alcove, she discovered maps, dozens of them, showing cities that no longer existed, borders that had shifted, coastlines before rising seas claimed them. Lucian had marked certain locations with red ink, places he'd lived, she guessed, or places he'd lost people he cared about. The marks clustered heavily around Rome, Constantinople, Paris, and a small village in Germany whose name she couldn't pronounce, Vienna. Lucian's voice came from behind her, rough with the remnants of day sleep. That village became Vienna. I lived there for 30 years before the wars came. Eleanor spun to find him standing in the passage, still pale but steady. The stone chamber door stood open behind him. I didn't hear you wake. The sun set an hour ago. I've been watching you explore. He moved to her side, studying the maps with eyes that held centuries of memory. You didn't run. I told you I wouldn't. People say many things they don't mean. He touched one of the red marks. Rome. I've lived long enough to know that promises made in fear or gratitude rarely survive the morning. Then it's good I made mine in clarity. Eleanor turned to face him fully. How do you feel? Strong. Thanks to you. His hand lifted to her neck, fingers brushing the mark he'd left. The bond flared at the contact, not as intense as before, but present. It's healing well. There won't be a scar. I wouldn't have minded a scar. Something flickered in his expression. Why not? Because it would be proof that this happened, that you're real, that I made a choice that mattered. She covered his hand with hers. I've spent 3 years making safe choices that kept me isolated. At least this choice, dangerous as it is, makes me feel alive. Lucian was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing small circles against her pulse. "The bond will fade completely in a few more days. When it does, you'll be able to leave without the Crimson House sensing my claim on you. And if I don't want it to fade?" "Eleanor, teach me," she interrupted. "You said you wanted more time, so use it. Teach me about your world. The rules, the politics, the lore. Make me understand what I've walked into." He studied her face, searching for something. Whatever he found must have satisfied him, because he finally nodded. "Very well. But we start with the most important lesson, the one that keeps humans alive when dealing with vampires." Eleanor straightened, suddenly attentive. "Which is, never accept gifts without understanding the cost. Never make promises without knowing the terms. And never, ever let a vampire claim you've given consent unless you mean it absolutely." His voice carried the weight of centuries of experience. "Our world runs on contracts written in blood. Words have power. Agreements bind. And breaking an oath can cost you more than your life. What else can it cost? Your will, your memories, your soul, if you believe in such things." He released her and moved to one of the bookshelves, pulling a slim volume. "This is the Codex of Houses, the laws that govern vampire society. It was written 2,000 years ago and hasn't changed. Every vampire knows these laws from the moment they're turned. You should know them too." Eleanor accepted the book. Unlike the others, this one was in English, or rather, had been translated at some point, the modern binding contrasting with ancient text. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because knowledge is the only protection I can give you that the Crimson House can't strip away." He settled into a chair, gesturing for her to sit across from him. "If Morgana returns, and you'll need to understand house law well enough to use it as a weapon for the next hours." Lucian taught her. He explained the 7 great houses and their territories. The council of lords that governed disputes. The blood oaths that bound vampires to their word. He taught her the difference between a claim and a bond, between protection and possession. He showed her the loopholes that had kept him alive through centuries of political maneuvering. Eleanor absorbed it all, asking questions, challenging assumptions, making him explain things in ways that made sense to human logic. And somewhere in the teaching, something shifted between them. The careful distance Lucian maintained began to dissolve. His responses grew more animated. He found himself smiling at her questions, laughing at her observations about the absurdity of certain ancient protocols. "So let me understand this," Eleanor said, leaning forward. "If a vampire claims you're under their protection, but another vampire with higher house standing disputes the claim, it goes to trial?" "Yes, trial by council judgment. Both parties present their case, and the lords vote. But you said you're exiled. Does that mean you have no standing?" "Technically, I retain my rank. I'm still a house lord, just without a house. But in practice, exile means my claims carry less weight." Lucian's expression darkened. "Which is why Morgana feels emboldened to challenge me. Then we need to restore your house." "Eleanor, I told you you don't want to play politics." "I know. But what if we didn't have to play?" She stood, pacing as her mind raced. "You said other members of the Shadowed House survived. They can't acknowledge you without risking their standing. But what if they didn't have to acknowledge you? What if they acknowledged me? You're not a vampire, but I activated ward sigils. I have a bond with you. And according to this," she tapped the codex, "house law allows for human advocates. People who speak on behalf of houses and mortal affairs." Lucian went still, the kind of stillness that meant he was thinking fast. "You want to become the Shadowed House's human advocate. Would it work?" "It might." He stood slowly, moving to where she'd stopped pacing. "If the remaining house members agreed. If the council recognized your appointment. If Morgana didn't kill you before any of it could be formalized. But it's possible, theoretically." His hands found her shoulders, his touch firm. "But Eleanor, being a house advocate means binding yourself to vampire politics for life. You'd be making yourself a target, permanently. Every decision the Shadowed House makes would fall partly on you. Every enemy we have would become your enemy." "Sounds like nothing's changed then." "They're already trying to kill me. This would make it official." Eleanor met his eyes steadily. "Good. Then at least I'd have the authority to fight back properly." Lucian stared at her, and through the fading bond, she felt his emotions churning: fear, hope. Something that might have been love if he allowed himself to name it. "You're serious about this?" "I have nothing to go back to. No wedding. No home I feel safe in. No life that makes sense anymore." She reached up, covering his hands with hers. But here, in this impossible sanctuary with you, I feel like maybe I could build something new. Something that matters. You'd be binding yourself to me, to my house, to a world that will never fully accept you. I know, you'd outlive your mortal friends. Watch them age while you remain tied to vampires who don't age. It's a form of immortality without the benefits. I know, his grip tightened. Why? Because you saw me at my lowest and didn't look away. Because you've been alone too long, and I know what that costs. Because she took a shaky breath. Because for the first time in 3 years, I don't feel like I'm just surviving. I feel like I'm living. Chapter 10. The Covenant of Equals. The came at midnight, when the moon hung dark and the city above slept. Eleanor felt them first, a disturbance in the wards that made her skin prickle. She'd been reading the Codex by candlelight while Lucian drafted letters to the scattered members of the shadowed house. He looked up at her, gasp, his expression shifting to grim understanding. How many? Eleanor asked. Lucian moved to the door, pressing his palm to the silver symbols. They pulsed once, twice, showing him what Eleanor couldn't see. 20. Maybe more. Morgana brought reinforcements. Can the wards hold against this many? He turned back to her, and his eyes blazed with inner light. Not forever. They'll break through eventually. And when they do, we fight. Eleanor stood, setting the codex aside. Together, Eleanor, I need you to listen carefully. Lucian crossed to her, taking both her hands. There's a passage behind the eastern wall. It leads to the catacombs, then to the old quarter's edge. If they breach the wards, I want you to run. We've had this conversation, and we're having it again. His grip tightened. Because this time, I'm not just protecting a stranger who wandered into my territory. I'm protecting someone who matters. Someone I care about more than I've cared about anything in 73 years. So please, Eleanor, promise me you'll run if it comes to that. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. And leave you to face them alone? I've lived to centuries. You've barely lived 3 decades. If one of us dies tonight, it should be me. No, she pulled her hands free and moved to the cabinet where he kept the silver blades. She took 2, feeling their weight, their purpose. We survived together or not at all. The wards shattered. The sound was like reality breaking, a discordant shriek that made Eleanor's teeth ache. Shadows poured through the door, more vampires than she could count, their eyes reflecting candlelight like wolves. Morgana led them, her smile sharp and victorious. Last stand in a broken sanctuary, she said, her voice carrying over the chaos. How poetic, Lucian. And you've brought your pet human to witness your end. She's not my pet. Lucian positioned himself beside Eleanor, not in front of her. She's my advocate, recognized by house law. Touch her, and you violate the codex itself. Morgana laughed. An advocate needs a house to represent. You have none. I have 7. A voice rang from the passage, female, commanding, ancient. A woman stepped through the broken door, flanked by 4 others. Eleanor recognized the fierce eyes from the portrait. The shadowed house endures. We answer to our advocate's call. Isabel? Lucian's voice broke on the name. Her daughter. The woman smiled, and it was both warm and terrible. Sophia, turned by my mother's blood before she died, raised on stories of the house lord who avenged her. We've been waiting 73 years for you to stop punishing yourself and come home. More figures emerged from the shadows, vampires bearing the silver insignia of the shadowed house. 10, 15, 20. They surrounded Eleanor and Lucian, forming a protective circle. Morgana's confidence wavered. This changes nothing. He's still exiled, exile that we never ratified. Sophia moved forward, and even Morgana stepped back from whatever power she carried. The shadowed house fell silent, but we never died. And now, through our human advocate, we reclaim what was always ours, our lord, our territory, and our voice in the council. The council will never accept, they already have. Another vampire stepped forward, ancient and terrifying, carrying papers sealed with 7 different crests. I am Marcus of the Eternal House Council, arbitrator. The shadowed house petition was heard and approved 2 hours ago. Lucian Thorne's exile is lifted. This sanctuary is sovereign territory. And you, Morgana of the Crimson House, are in violation of territorial law. The Crimson House vampires shifted, uncertainty rippling through their ranks. Morgana's face twisted with rage, but she was outmaneuvered, and she knew it. This isn't over, she hissed. It is for tonight. Sophia's voice carried absolute authority. Leave, before we're forced to involve the council further. One by one, the Crimson House vampires withdrew. Morgana left last, her eyes promising vengeance. But she left. The silence that followed felt heavy with centuries of waiting ended. Lucian turned to Sophia, his expression shattered. You shouldn't have come. You risked everything, you're our lord. Sophia embraced him, fierce and quick. We protect our own, always. Eleanor watched the shadowed house surround Lucian, welcoming him back with words and languages she didn't know and gestures that transcended speech. He'd been alone for so long, and now, because she'd activated wards she shouldn't have touched, because she'd offered blood freely, because she'd chosen to fight instead of run, he had family again. Hours later, after the house members had departed with promises to rebuild, Eleanor and Lucian stood alone in the sanctuary once more. You did this, Lucian said quietly. You brought them back to me. They were always yours. They were just waiting for permission to acknowledge it. Eleanor moved to him, suddenly aware of how everything had changed. So what happens now? Now. He took her hands, his touch, careful. Now I offer you a choice. You've bound yourself to the shadowed house as our advocate. That's a mortal position with a mortal lifespan. Unless you choose otherwise, Eleanor's breath caught. You're offering to turn me. I'm offering you the choice. Immortality with me, with my house, walking this world as one of us. Or freedom, remain human, serve as advocate until you choose to step down, build whatever life you want knowing you have the shadowed house's protection. His eyes held infinite patience. I won't influence your decision. I won't pressure you. Whatever you choose, I'll accept. Eleanor studied his face, beautiful, ancient, finally free of the grief that had haunted him. She thought about immortality, about watching centuries pass, about becoming something other than human. The choice should terrify her. Instead, she felt calm. I choose partnership, she said. Not possession. Not you deciding what's best for me. Not me losing myself in your world. I'll stay human for now. Serve as your advocate. Learn your world from this side first. And when I'm ready, if I'm ever ready, we'll discuss immortality again. As equals? Lucian's smile broke like dawn. Equals? Can you accept that? I've waited 2 centuries to meet someone who'd demand equal footing. He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. I can wait a little longer, for forever. Eleanor kissed him, then soft, careful, full of promise. He tasted of night, and old books, and the faint copper of preserved blood. When they parted, she felt the bond between them settling into something new. Not ownership, not obligation, just possibility. Welcome home, Lord Thorn, she whispered. Welcome home, Advocate Eleanor. Outside, the city slept. Above, stars wheeled in ancient patterns. And in a sanctuary hidden beneath the old quarter's bones, 2 people who'd been broken by loneliness began building something neither could have imagined. Alone, a life defined by choice, respect, and the understanding that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop running from what scares you and start running toward what makes you feel alive. The shadowed house had returned, and Eleanor walked into immortality's world wearing her mortality like armor, beloved and unbroken, choosing danger over safety, connection over isolation, and love over fear, one careful, deliberate, perfectly equal step at a time. The end.